Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I revisit a piece that I did for a previous video. If you watched my postcard series or my Beatrix Potter series, you may remember this piece. If not, I will link those down below for you. Now this is a Beatrix Potter style art, and I'm going to do the same piece and another Beatrix style art. And as you can see, I have already drawn this out previously, and I'm going to use a Durant Inktense, this is Baked Earth pencil, to get a light wash on here. Something I like to do for my Beatrix Potter pieces when I'm trying to emulate her work, I want to give it an old feel, so I will do a tea wash. But we've spoken in other videos about the tea being kind of acidic, and I'm trying to get away from that, so that's what we're doing here. I use a very light hand with this Derwent Inktense pencil, and as you can see, once I add the water to it, it gives it kind of a tea look. It's a little bit more brown than what I used for the previous piece, but I think it's going to be just fine. It is still a tea look, and as you can see right here, when I line them up side by side, it is a little more brown. I think I probably used a green tea, but it's going to work fine. Now let's take a look at what I am using today. I have a Winsor Newton size 6 round brush, a microfiber cloth, and then I have my Winsor and Newton paints. And I will have the colors listed on the screen in case I forget to say them or I'm talking about something else, so you can keep up with those. The style we're going to be doing for this piece is more of a realism type style. Now, it was realism in the previous piece, but we inked that in. And what I noticed in Beatrix's work is that when she was doing a study, something for a scientific magazine or doing some sort of botanical study, she would not necessarily ink those in, and they looked a little more realistic. So instead of having the inked pieces that she used for her whimsical realism, she tucked that ink away and she leaned more into her paint instead of her inked lines to get the realism for the piece. So I'm using the same colors on this. I went back to my video to make certain I was using the same color palette. The only color that I did not use the same on this was the yellow ochre. I left that completely out, and it wasn't intentional. It was just that my older brain forgot, even though I had it written down, that I needed to use it. So here's a comparison. You can see we're starting out the same kind of washes. We're laying down the colors. Now, of course, the one that's finished has those final layers on there, and we will get to those layers. So we have the yellow. I'm going to let that dry, and we're going to move down to the stems and the leaves. And again, the same colors. I'm trying to get the same feel, but you will see in the end that it doesn't necessarily end up with the same greens in the same spaces, and I couldn't do that because I'm not leaning into those lines. I'm going to have to rely on my paint. I'm going to have to rely on subtle differences in the shades in order to get the realism. So I'm going to be quiet for a minute, and you can watch me lay down these colors on here. We're going to be getting our first wash of colors on everything, and then I'll come back and put additional layers on top. And this has more layers than the previous piece. It's going to require more layers so we can get that realism. It took me longer to paint this. I think once I put all of the videos together before I speeded things up, I think it was 74 minutes is how long I worked on this piece. And that doesn't include the drawing. So that's how long it took. I'm going to hop off and I'll hop back on in just a minute and we'll talk some more. As we're moving through the stems and the leaves, I wanted to point out that I'm using the same technique that I used for the previous piece as far as dropping colors in. So she does juxtaposition some of her colors. She does put them side by side, but she will also put colors down side by side when they're still wet. And I do move around so that it can get some dry edges if I don't want the colors to blend. But one thing she did do for her pieces was she may put, and you'll notice I did that on that first flower right underneath the petals when I was doing the little green areas that's coming down into the stem. I had a color on there, and then I came back in and dropped some blue on top, and you'll see me do that throughout. If I want an area to be a little bit darker of a blue or a little more blue-green, I will drop extra colors in. If I want it to be a little more yellow in an area, I'll just drop that in on top as well. So I'm going to be doing that all the way through. And that was something I really started noticing when I did this study of her onion. And again, I'll have those studies down below. I'll have those playlists for you so you can take a look at the one that I did of the onion. And you'll see how I'm tapping the colors in, and that allows me to get those colors to kind of blend together, kind of moves them through each other while they're wet. This paper is 140 pound, 100% cotton paper. It is cold press. I will list that down below as well because I know some of you have asked about what type of paper I use. And this is also, someone else asked about in another video what size I'm working on because it looks small. This is the postcard size, and I chose a 6 by 4.5 or 4.5 by 6, however you'll want to have the paper there. But this is like the smaller postcard and not the larger postcard size. So I pre-cut those. When I buy paper, I get the 9 by 12 so I can get 4 postcards out of it. And the paper is kind of expensive, but it does make a difference when you're wanting to do watercolor, especially 100% cotton. Now, this is one of those leaves that I was talking about. I put down the more yellow-green, and while it was still wet, I went to the top of the leaf and put down the more blue-green, and I'm allowing those to kind of mix together. It's okay if it has a fuzzy line right now. We're going to use that to our advantage later so that we can get the resemblance of veins going through the leaves, so be watching for that. are just about to finish up painting in the leaves and the stems, and I did notice right to the right above that bottom leaf there was some yellow, and I'm trying to correct it. This is a scrubber brush, and what you do is when the color is dry, you get a little bit of water on that brush and you can scrub that color out. Unfortunately, there was supposed to be a gap between that leaf there, and because, I should say fortunately, because the paper has that tint on there, all I had to do was remove a little bit of it, and you'll notice at the end that you cannot tell that I scrubbed those up. And that was another good thing about having the Inktense instead of the tea underneath, or if you want to use coffee instead of coffee underneath. If I were to come back with that scrubber brush on top and try to lift colors, lift mistakes, it would lift those as well. But that Inktense, because it is ink based, it will not come up. Once it's on the paper, it's pretty much there. Now, if you try hard, you can remove it, but you're also, once it completely dries like this, you're also going to compromise your paper. So just a thought there on that. Now, we are coming back. A lot of this is dry, and I'm going to be dropping some of the colors back in so that we can get some of these shapes. So I start with a flat wash on everything to kind of block in my colors, and then I'm going to come back with a layer and I'm going to block in the shapes because these are little buds that haven't come out yet. So I'm going to put in some of the colors to kind of identify where the different areas are on there. And then with my final layers, and I'll comment on that when we get there, I'm going to use those to get the depth in. So that's where we're going to start really putting the shadows in. Was so proud before painting this little red bud that's coming out. I thought it was completely finished. I was going to let it dry, and I went, oh, I forgot to paint that. So we're coming back in. We painted that, but this is a good time to compare. You see where we are on things. Same drawing, different application as far as laying down the colors and the shades that we are using on things. So this is going to be my official second layer. I'm trying to keep the petal colors in the top palette and then the leaves and the stems in that bottom palette, but I'm not always putting the colors up there, and that is because I'm using the same colors. I'm still using the French ultramarine as I'm using right there. I still have the Winsor blue. I still have the cadmium free yellow. So I'm not putting those up on the screen, but they are the same colors that I'm using, and I'm trying to keep them in the same spots. Now, as we get closer to the end, I'm needing to vary my colors just a little bit, so I'll mix them together a little haphazardly. I am bringing out my size, I think it's probably a size 2 round. I keep saying that. I really need to buy a proper size 2 round. This little travel brush came with my Winsor Newton paints. Now, these Winsor Newton paints, they're a pocket set, and this is not the palette, the container they came in. This is one that I purchased because it fits better on the screen. But this little brush did come with that set. It also came with a little container for water, and it came for something to hold your water in, like to transport it with a little top on it, and it came with a sponge. I think I have that linked below in some of my other videos, but if not, I'll make sure that I link that one below here. This one has the cadmium free colors. That's why I chose this particular set, but this brush came with it. I don't normally use a small brush, but these are kind of tiny areas. And when I painted the original one, I didn't use the smaller brush. And again, that's because I had the ink lines. And I think that's something else when you have the inked lines. You don't have to worry so much about what my teachers in elementary school hated, which was painting outside of the lines. So I do have to worry about that now, and I want to be a little more precise because, as you can see, I'm using a little more blue in this on this little bud, and that's because I want to get those dark areas in for the shading. I have reached the point of layering the colors where I don't necessarily want some of these to run together. It didn't really matter too much when we're laying down that first layer because we're wanting to get the shapes in, we're wanting to get some of the colors in, and it's okay if they run together. But now that we have reached this end point, you'll notice I'm hopping around. I'm going from one area, I'll let that dry, then I'll hop over to another area. I still allow some of the paints to blend together. I still need that in some of the areas. I'm doing that in areas where I'm wanting it to be a gradual blend. Then I will drop it in when it's wet. Otherwise, I am going to skip around so that they don't mix together and I can start to make those leaves be individual leaves. Because they don't have those inking lines, I'm going to have to make certain they have their proper edges, and the only way to do that is to let an area dry and then come back and work next to it. This is the area that I should have used the yellow ochre, and I should have mixed it with that burnt sienna as I'm doing with the cadmium for yellow, but I'm getting the same results. So it's okay that I forgot to use that and put it in my palette. And I'm using the technique now where I'm going to be going back and forth. I did put some extra cadmium for yellow at the top, and that is so I can go back and forth just like I did there and brighten up some of those flowers. And some of these colors, I am doing the technique again. You'll notice I'm hopping around. I'm not working side by side on some of these because I'm wanting edges. And I'm also using that extra yellow and mixing it in with these colors, and I still have some of the burnt sienna by itself there where I can tap into that so that I can tap these colors together while they're still wet and allow them to blend together on an individual petal. So this one needed to be a little darker towards the center and a little lighter on the outside. Some of them I'm not going to paint areas at all. I'm going to leave it, and I'm going to allow the yellow base I have on there to be my highlight for the piece. So I'm starting with my light colors and moving to my dark colors. I'm actually following what most people consider a rule. I don't consider rules to be necessary. And when we're working with painting, because they change depending on what you need. Now this is a color that I added in that I did not have in my previous palette because this was Payne's Gray and I'm only using a tiny bit, and I'm just dropping it in to that dark yellow with the burnt sienna because it's giving me a nice green. What I can see on my reference photo was that there were centers in there that had some green and it went down to dark, and I'll come back and tap that again. You'll see in a few minutes with a little bit more of that darker color down in that center. And I had a line there previously in the other piece, so I couldn't, because I had an ink line there, I couldn't add those colors in. I didn't have to. I had a weighted line there. But now that I don't have that weighted line with the ink, I'm going to have to use my colors to create it. So we're going to keep on adding layers on to the petals, and I'll hop back on in just a second. I am adding another color to our palette here. I'm adding some of the ivory black to that alizarin crimson, which I did not do in the original version of this because, again, as I said, in the dark areas on the flowers between the petals, on this one, I had lines to fill that in. So I had my thick and thin, all of my weighted lines in there, and I didn't need to have any dark in the center, but I'm going to have to go over this a couple of times with the darker colors so that I can bring that back in and you can see all of those lines in the center. Now this is the part I spoke about earlier in the video where I'm just going to be mixing my yellows and blues together and have some haphazard greens. Then I'm going to come back and add some Winsor blue and try to pull everything together. But I needed a few more greens than what I actually had mixed in the previous palette, but I wanted to stick to the colors that I use as much as possible. And I know I've added a few extras in and I forgot the yellow ochre, but we're trying to keep with a similar palette. So that's what you're going to see down in the bottom. This is an example of why it took so long to finish this piece, much longer than the original version, because I'm adding so many layers on. I want to make certain that you can tell there are veins in this leaf, and in the original version, I had drawn these in. One thing that Miss Potter did do with her more realistic pieces, and she even did it in some of her stuff like Peter Rabbit, she would draw with her brush. Now she's using a dry brush technique, and you'll notice I haven't mentioned that yet. I've mentioned in all my other Beatrix Potter videos that she used a dry brush technique where she's using the water on the palette. That's what I'm doing. I'm using the water on the palette. My paper's dry, my brush is wet. I don't have an excessive amount of water on my brush. I'm trying to use what is in the palette. You'll probably notice that my palette dries out fairly quickly, and that is because if you've watched any of my other videos, you know I like to work in front of an open window. It's summer in the South, so my palette is drying out quickly. I'm too hard-headed to reach up and close the window. I like to leave it open. I like that warm air coming in. I like the fresh air. So it's drying my palette out quickly, but that dry palette and having just a little bit of water on it allows me to draw with my brush as she did. Here's another addition to the palette. We're going to be using some burnt umber, and I'm going to add some Payne's Gray to it so I can get a nice dark brown, because I'm wanting to do, and I'm going to zoom in here, wanting to do some more detail work in these areas where I had lines in the previous piece. So I'm going to show you this with the same, and you can't see it over my palette very well because I did zoom in. I'm wanting you to see it's the same color, and no matter what I put it on top of, whether it's yellow or green or now the red, I'm going to be getting the perfect shade for that particular element, and that's because we are layering colors, and watercolor is transparent, so you can still see the color underneath. And even though this is the same shade that I'm using, I'm working out of the same little pile of paint there, I am getting the proper shades for each area. I have switched over to that tiny brush again, and I'm getting the final details. And again, this is drawing with the brush, just what Miss Potter would have done. She would have drawn with her brush. And because I don't have the lines, I'm having to do this to get all of the detail in. I don't want to outline each petal, and you can still see my pencil lines, but that's perfectly acceptable in watercolor. So if you have made it to the end of another long video, again, kudos to you. I appreciate your being here. I always am happy when you're here. Let me know if you have tried these, and remember, you can check those out on my blog. I'll have that link below. There they are, side by side. You have the realistic with no lines on the left hand side, and then the realistic, or the more of the whimsical realism, on the right hand side. So you can see they're the same, but they're different. And let me know, which do you like best? I'm really tempted to use that pen on that new piece, but I'm going to try to hold off. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll see you in the next one.